Now we're going to have Ran and Rumina talk about the trainees' point of view. And we're going to do a bit of myth busting, and then we'll have a Q&A discussion after this.
Okay, so yeah, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining. As Cash mentioned, that myself and Ran will just run through the T&O curriculum from a trainee's perspective and hopefully clear some of the myths and facts. Some of this may have already been repeated, but it's good for repetition is good, just also for when there is big change. So next slide, Ran. So as we know, in August, the new curriculum is coming. We know that for sure. And I hope everyone's familiar with the fact that the training has changed into phases now. Phase 1 looking at predominantly core training, and phase 2 is early year higher specialist training, so ST3 to ST6. And phase 3 finally is the last two training years, ST7 and 8, before CCT. And the whole idea behind the new curriculum is to approach this with a holistic assessment of the trainees, and hopefully the endpoint of training is now indicated by completion of curriculum, but also attaining level 4 GCP and SIP assessments. So what does it mean for us as trainees? We know one of the really good points is that we don't have to chase the large number of WBAs. In some regions it's 80, but the focus is now less quantity but more quality assessments. Training is becoming more individualized, and this is excellent because we can use MCRs to guide feedback to trainees, so those areas that they're very strong at, but also areas for improvement. And this also assesses trainees not just as a cohort but as individuals. As we all know, we all learn from at different pace. Some may develop or attain sort of skills much quicker than others, and therefore training can be more flexible. Those trainees that are excelling can have an accelerated training, so may not necessarily need the 6 years to obtain CCT, but in the same light, some of us may need a bit longer, and therefore that can also be modified. One of the key things as well is the holistic assessment. So with our old curriculum, we looked at WBAs, particularly CBDs. It was very case-based or procedure-based, but the characteristics that weren't looked at were, can we run clinics independently? Can we run a theatre list? And this is now taken into account. Therefore, hopefully we'll all become better first aid consultants as we leave off the top of our training. So just to run through a few statements, I thought it might be nice to just go through some statements, and then I'd like you to think if this looks like a myth or a fact, and then we'll clarify exactly what it is. So to begin with, every trainee has to change to the new curriculum in August 2021. Is that a myth or a fact? Hopefully we all know it's a myth. So every trainee, with the exception of ST8. So if you are an ST8 on August the 4th, you have the option to stay in the old curriculum, and every other trainee will need to transition. As Rob Gregory mentioned, those that are in less than full-time training, they can transition over until they get to the next training level, but the ultimate deadline is everyone should have transitioned to the new curriculum by August 2023. Moving on to the next. Trainings are required to organise their own MCR meeting. Myth or fact? It's a myth. So as explained previously, hopefully everyone's remembered that actually this responsibility does lie with the lead clinical supervisor, or the AES. They'll have to liaise with the consultants, supervisors, to organise a time to sit down and discuss the trainee's performance and feedback. However, we should actually look at this as a sort of shared responsibility, and like we do with our learning objectives or entering meetings, we sort of prompt each other, and so I think that would encourage that to continue, so trainees can prompt the trainers to say, oh, I think MCI is due. But the key thing that trainees need to get involved with is to make sure that they're well prepared in advance of the meeting so it can run effectively. Trainees will no longer need to complete WBAs. And that's a myth. We know that the 40 or the 80 WBAs are not required, but we still need to do critical condition CPDs and the level 4 PBAs of the indicative numbers as those targets were set out in August 2018. A trainee can fail on a single SIP or GCP descriptor. Is that a myth or fact? It's a myth, so it's not necessarily. So generally, a single SIP or GCP is actually used as one aspect of the whole assessment. However, if it's coming down to ST8 and you're about to CCT, you will need to have passed all the SIPs and GCPs before you can CCTs. But if you're an ST3, 4, 5, or even 8, and you're just in your interim MCR, it's just an area to improve on before your next ARCP or next assessment. The indicative operation types and numbers are changing again. Is that a myth or fact? It's a myth. So if we go to the next slide, this has remained unchanged. So August 2018, some of the indicative numbers changed. So we're still aiming for 1,800 in total. And as first surgeon, we're aiming for 70%. And we know level 4 PBA is required by 2 different consultant supervisors. This is not new. Hopefully we're all very familiar with this, except for the pediatric supracondylar. You don't need 2 level 4 PBAs or XFIX due to the rarity of both those procedures. And I think I'll hand over to Van for the remainder of the talk.
Thanks, Rumina. That's great. So just a few more myths or facts. So a trainee can apply for a CCT before finishing ST8. And hopefully you understand all of this from the talks previously, that this is in fact a fact. So clearly there will still be a period of time required for any trainee to meet the curriculum requirements, be that the FRCS exam or to rotate through the subspecialties, as well as achieving all their indicative numbers and achieving all their critical CBDs and indicative PBAs. So that time will probably take around about 6 years, but clearly for those trainees who are excelling, they can apply for CCT or finish rather prior to ending their 6-year training contract. Clinical supervisor reports will no longer be mandatory. Well, that's actually a fact, but they're not obsolete. I think that's really important for everyone to understand, is there is, as Lisa explained in her presentation, the option of clinical supervisors to utilize the clinical supervisor report to give feedback to trainees out with the MCR. So MCRs will be completed with the trainee in absentia, and of course this is a fact. Much like ARCP process, the ARCP is completed in absentia, and then you have an in-person meeting to get feedback and for discussion. This will be the case with MCRs as well. So your lead clinical supervisor will be able to meet up with you after the MCRs and give you feedback. Now, there are various reasons why trainees really aren't, there are various reasons why the forum for discussion during MCRs may not be appropriate for trainees, and that's not to bias trainees, and that's not to talk about the trainees in a negative way, but more to safeguard the consultants when they need to discuss issues relating to the department or anything that relates to the delivery of training that can be changed as a department to better the training for that trainee. So it's important to understand that. Next is MCRs do not replace MSS, so multi-source feedback, and that, of course, that is true. Now, perhaps there's an issue with 3-letter acronyms, but clearly MCR and MSF are quite similar. So perhaps maybe that's why some trainees have got that wrong in the past. But certainly MSFs are very important to attain, and obviously give us NDT feedback about our own practices. Trainees will get more regular formalized feedback from clinical supervisors, and of course that's a fact. And that is one of the benefits one of the many benefits of the new curriculum, is that trainees will be able to get more formalized feedback. So for the average placement length of 6 months. A trainee will get a interim MCR at around about 3 months, and obviously a final MCR at 6 months. So that's 2 per 6 month placement. That's 4 formalised feedback per year, and clearly shorter placements will then incur more formalised feedback. So as Rumina said, these are the reasons, these are the sort of summary of the new curriculum. Clearly it is more holistic in the way that we are assessed as trainees, and it's encouraging to hear from Rob that, really the burden or the increase in workload will most likely lie on the trainers. So really we're not doing something much different than what we're doing already as trainees. So just one last thing, obviously we have our annual virtual congress next week. So for those trainees who haven't signed up, who are free next Tuesday and Wednesday, please go onto the website and follow the link and sign up for our virtual congress. We look forward to seeing you there.